Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. Here's your host, Trevor Sharon.
Thank you for joining us today on Candid Conversations. I hope you're in a cool place because things are about to get a little bit warm in here.
Nice.
Also, just as a warning that if you have little kids around, we are going to be talking about intimacy. We're going to be talking about sex, baby. Let's talk about you. So just be aware that that's what we're going to talk about.
Please don't sing again.
I can't promise it. It's way stuck in my head. But Dr. Mayfield and I are joined in studio with David Galvan, who works with Education for a Lifetime and Life Network, going into schools and talking about sex with students. But I want you to kind of explain to us and the listeners what you do.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me a part of this show. We get the opportunity to go and talk to students about relationships and how to have healthy relationships, and usually that comes around the topic of sexual activity. And so we talk about everything that you can think about that it correlates with sexual activity, from social media and internet to pornography and all of those aspects, to boundaries, to unhealthy relationships. And so we do that over the course of 5 days in a typical classroom for 50-minute presentations with a medical nurse and doctor that'll come in and talk about all those fun medical things that are needed to be discussed in that classroom. But we get to do that under the umbrella, of course, of Life Network. This department, Education for a Lifetime, is that preventive option or that preventative area that we get to do this with schools. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's so
I'm
much
super
fun.
excited for this. We talked about early on in this podcast that we were going to be talking about some of these more difficult conversations to have. And so we talked about race and racism, which was tricky and hard to talk through. And today I'm really excited just because I know how awkward it gets when you start talking about sex. And coming from a family that was pretty open about having conversations that were productive about sex, it's a little bit easier for me. My wife would rather never mention it in a public space, and I think a lot of us are in that place. Would you agree, David?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think I've not personally ever had that conversation with my parents, and I'm not sure I'm going back to get that. But I would say that most of us, even as parents or growing up, I should say first, let's start there, that we didn't have that conversation. And I think our parents are probably feeling like us as parents now and saying, what do we say and how do we say it? When do we bring it up? And why should we even talk about it? And so I think as a part of our conversation today is just talking about and encouraging parents to have that conversation and to encourage dialogue versus lecture. And we'll kind of get into that as we go on. But I think parents, we don't understand even how much our kids believe the things that we're telling them.
Right.
Even though it doesn't feel like they're listening to us or they're really taking in what we're saying, but they do actually pay attention to us. There's actually a recent study that was done not too long ago that says that 50% or 52% of children ages 12 to 15 say that their parents are still the most influential to them.
Dang.
That's over 50% of you that are still out there that your kids are like, I still believe mom and dad. So whoever the 50% are, take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Take advantage of that influence. So
that's a very interesting statistic, because I would not have expected it to be that high. I feel like those are the ages that we typically look at as those are the years that they stop listening to us, which I mean, I guess is the other 50%.
Yep.
But so when we go to this conversation about sex, when is the right time to talk about it? Because, I mean, is it 12 and 15 when you're still influential, or is it earlier? What's the best age to have these conversations?
You know, I think as culturally, we are continuously developing earlier. And the earlier that we can have this conversation, the better. Now, that does not negate the fact that if you've not had this conversation as a parent with your children and they're older now, but I think if we can catch our children between that 6 to 8 zone, we're really getting an influence on them to help them understand. Now, we're not going into full detail, this is what sexual activity is and all these other little details, but we're really beginning the process of how do we protect and guard our bodies and what body parts are things that are private and not private, and really beginning that conversation. I think, you know, I've had parents ask me, like, what do I do? Like, what do I do? Like, how do I even begin the conversation? And I say, well, start somewhere. Start somewhere. There was this book I read one time, and he was quoting an example of what he was doing with his son, and he had played a CD. They were going on a fishing trip, and he listened to the whole CD. And at the end of the CD, the dad goes, so, son, what do you think? And he goes, first of all, I think it's gross that you and mom do this. Second of all, I think I'm really going to like it when I grow up. and I think, we never know what our kids are how they're going to respond because of their unique personalities. But as a parent, one of the things that I can encourage us to do is just be intentional. Yeah. Be intentional about understanding your kids, to say, hey, what does trigger them, and how should I come across to them? And then again, just start with something, whether that's going out with them once a week and just creating that. But don't make your first date time or group time with your student. Yeah. Don't make that your first time and make big conversations. Because every time they think you're going to take them to ice cream, something weird's going to happen. And you don't want them to do that. And so, really setting the tone early on is going to be a helpful piece to that.
Well, do you find too that it's not just having these kind of conversations, but just having hard conversations in general? Mm-hmm. If we don't have those with our kids from the early on, even just about feelings, about life, about anything, right, that this becomes like a bomb drop.
Yeah, actually, there's some research out there that shows that our kids, something that us as parents, we love the trump card. We love trump cards because that gets us out of the hole. When we're like, what do we say? And our famous saying as parents is, because I said so. Yeah. And or you just get to this place, and you just go silent. And I think you're right. Kids need that conversation. And because I said so, there's actually research out there that shows that the moment we start doing that with our kids on a young level, between that kindergarten, first grade, second, they actually stop the ability to continue to learn. Because what they understand is that someone will tell me what I need to do and what I don't need to do. Huh. And rather than them taking on the responsibility and how to define that. So when I'm with parents at any point, I'm always asking them, please stop saying because I said so. And they're like, why? Because I said so. They don't like it too much. But what I would say is that all of us do things because of why.
Right.
And our children, the number one question they've been asking us since 2 years old, if you hang around a 2-year-old, why?
Yep.
Why? And it's like those little seagulls from Nemo, right? And so it's ongoing. And really what our kids are asking us is to explain to the best of our ability to them at their current state, why. And if we can do that, especially in regards to difficult topics, I think they continue to learn and they continue to be shaped into what we're asking them to be.
Yeah. So having meaningful conversations with their kids and not ending with because I said so is important. But why is talking about sex important? Of all the subjects that are uncomfortable and inconvenient, what is the importance of the sex conversation?
I would say from my perspective that the importance of that conversation is that it's always going to be there. It's not going away. It's not a conversation that's just going to oh yeah, it's, the sun's going to set and then something else is going to happen. No, that conversation will stay there. At some point or another, your children will want to be in a relationship. They'll want to discover that and continue down that path. And so having the discussion around sexual activity and seeing what your household and what you view as family will say, hey, this is what we want to talk about. And this is what we look, the more comfortable we can have that conversation, then we set our children up for success in relationships. Many times when I talk to students who are in abusive relationships, it's because their parents have not talked about sex in the household or what boundaries look like. And so if we don't give our students the opportunity to kind of have that conversation, then they won't have the conversation with their future partner. And if they don't have it with their future partner, then what kind of boundaries are they setting and what does that look like? And so those are some things of why it would be important, especially around sexual activity.
I think it comes back to that it's only going to get worse from here as far as our sexualized culture as well, right? I mean, and so the messages they're getting from media and from friends and from fill in the blank is not going to be as accurate as what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, sometimes as parents, when we hear the word sex, I think our brain, we're like, just shut it down.
Yeah.
Goes completely silent. And there's really 3 messages that our kids get. First message from us as parents is the moment we hear sex, we're like, pull over the car, turn off all the music, go silent, don't say nothing, pretend like you didn't hear the word. If you're part of a faith-based community, you'll probably hear it in the context of it's bad, it's wrong, don't do it until you're married. And so
which makes it so awkward when you get married on your honeymoon and going, this was wrong about 20 hours ago.
20 hours ago.
Now, what are we
I've spent
doing?
my entire life knowing that I shouldn't do this.
Yes.
And now I can.
No, I can.
And what do I do?
Yeah, exactly. And so on a faith-based community, we can see that. But then also on a world and culture at large, it's, hey, go in and have sex, but be safe with it. And so now our kids are getting these 3 messages, but then no message from us as parents. And that's really difficult for your kids to kind of navigate in the midst of a hard conversation of what does that look like and how does that operate. So being able to have more dialogue and less lecture, your kids will respond in a way that says, oh, I'm getting to understand what mom and dad like and don't like about relationships or whatever that may be.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is they're going to learn about sex somewhere. Either it's going to be you, it could be this podcast that they're learning about sex, it could, anywhere, because we're bombarded. It's such a pervasive subject in our culture, even in a non-verbal way.
And think about the generational piece to this, right? My conversation with my dad was awkward because his dad's conversation was awkward, or didn't have, right? And like you're talking about with your parents too, like we never had this conversation. I'm not sure I want to have this conversation now at a 36, 37 year old, but if we're making that a part of our culture and our language and our family, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's something to be worked through, and it's done out of relationship. Can be a beautiful conversation.
Oh, it can be completely beautiful. Actually, one of the things that we, I think, strive as parents is we would love for our kids to ask questions except sex. Like, ask me about anything, just don't ask me about that. And some of it is we feel ill-equipped because of our own sexual history, and what we did and what we didn't do. And I think as parents, to have an authentic, honest, genuine conversation with our kids has big dividends. And that's knowing like the appropriate time, like of what that situation looks like. I've had parents ask me, do I just tell them everything that I did wrong? No. But incrementally you can in some way.
Or when do you tell it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I've got some people that their 9-year-old probably needs to hear it.
Yes.
Because they're at school and it's different. But there's other 9-year-olds that wait till they get to 13 or 14 before we have this conversation. And so I think it's like what we're talking about is not just a carte blanche, like the
one-time conversation.
What's the old projector machine? Carbon copy or whatever. We just don't take that. We just don't put it on there, and it's this is for everybody. I think parents need to be. This is where I think with parents that are having a hard time with these kinds of conversations is to go back and listen to the beginning of this season of podcasting and how to have conversations with their kids and just how to have conversations in general. Don't start with this one.
Right. No, no, please don't.
Like ease into it but don't, I think know your kid. And it's, conversation we're going to have a different podcast about, if you don't know your kid, like how do you have the right to speak into these kinds of things? So
showing interest, all of us love it when people show interest. The moment I show interest into something that my kid is doing, they open up. Like, oh, I love this. My little girl loves soccer. The moment I talk about anything soccer or anything sports oriented, brightens up. Yes, I want to talk more. And so really we have to be really good almost detectives. Like the moment we hear a key word, we're like, oh yes, and keep that down that trail and keep interest in that. And you're right, Mark. And when we hear of what age and when, my little girl came home at 7 years old, second grade, and told me, hey, someone said sex on the playground. Then my conversation begun.
Yeah,
absolutely.
At that point,
and I have my 9-year-old who's we homeschool for our own reasons. And it'll probably, we'll be 3 or 4 more years before we have this conversation, possibly, right? She'd come home in from church or whatever, and but it's not that your time was bad and mine's not, or mine's bad and yours is not. It's just knowing the ebbs and flows of our families and our kids, and but my daughter knows. Okay, your chest and your vagina and all that is private areas, and if anybody even goes near that, you have the right to punch and kick and claw, like the self-protection piece. She knows that piece, but that's all she knows. Right.
And even in I give this example, being interested in what your kids watch and what they're putting on their social media. Like my little girl wanted to watch a particular show. And I said to her, you can watch that as long as I can ask you questions about the show.
Perfect.
And she goes, Okay, so she's a couple episodes in, and we're like into season 2, I think is what happened. And I asked her a question. I said, it looks like these individuals on this show like end up having sex like just randomly. And she goes, not me. I go, well, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say you. Right. And she's take it 12 years old at this time, and I go, no. I go, what do you think? And she goes, oh, you know what, Dad? I wouldn't do it until like, oh man, like until I'm ready. And I go, well, when will ready be? And she goes, well, maybe when I'm like 25. And I go, well, what if you're not ready then? And she kind of found herself in a place where she goes, well, maybe when I get married. Now, none of this was introduced by me, none of this, and I do this on a regular basis, but I knew to just ask questions.
Sure.
Because I believe this about our kids. Yeah. They'll find the answer if we lead them.
So what I'm hearing you say is be inquisitive, not accusatory.
Yes, very much so.
Which is, hello, active parenting, yes. Good job.
And also that it's not the talk. Right. It's a continuing talk. It's a continuing conversation.
Talk.
Right. I may not have, so I don't have any kids, but I have 6 younger siblings. Yes. And I've seen my parents. I was the first one to get the sex talk.
Oh, good. You got a good version. The original.
My dad was drawing balloons and Easter eggs and talking about it. Dude, it was amazing. My sister got talked to in the middle of a plumbing section of Home Depot with male and female bolts. There are really bad ways to do it that are just hilarious to look back on. But like my 3 little brothers, they're in a culture right now where they're bombarded. They're on the internet playing games. Yep. They're just doing normal stuff for kids their age now. Right. And a lot of it involves the internet or social media or just a bigger window into the world than I had.
Right.
And so my parents did a really good job of saying, okay, let's talk about safe images and inappropriate images. Let's talk about pornography.
Great.
And what do you do when you see this? And what should you do? And what are you going to feel? Let's talk about masturbation and what that is and what role that plays and just all of these really uncomfortable things, especially with younger kids.
Right. But you just made about half of our listeners just like,
oh, I know.
Oh, cringe. Oh, he said it. He said it.
But I think, it's wonderful to watch my brothers growing up in a way that if I had that equipping, that understanding, and not saying like, my parents did anything wrong, they really did their best as their first child back in the 90s.
Right.
But seeing my brothers with that equipping, that continuing conversation about sex and purity and pornography and all of this has been awesome because I know that I wouldn't have made a lot of the mistakes that I had made had I had a continuing conversation in a good open door.
Well, and I have a friend, I'm not going to name the name, but somebody that I respect greatly, and he has a 16-year-old son, and he's talking about this. I've let him know my struggle and that I'm, how I've overcome through pornography and that kind of stuff. Right. But that, hey, it's an open conversation. And I know that you're going to be exposed to it. So when you are, let's talk about it. It's not something to hide or to be shameful about, but let's move through it. Right. And it's in the hidden pieces. Right. In the darkness is where it becomes shameful. Right. Right. Instead of coming out into light. So I love that we're having this conversation, even just laying the foundation, because I know this is going to be like a 6-part series where we're going to really get into some depth here. So for those of you that are listening, like this is just like scratching the surface, light stuff right now. But it's something that culture has not done well, and the church has done even a poorer job of. Right.
What we make taboo, that has been made or should have been made or was made, I should say, as something great, doesn't help the situation. If we just make it taboo because we don't know what to say, what we really should be doing is some of our greatest resources and allies right now are Alexa and Siri. Like as a parent, if you don't know the answer to a question and your kid says why, then you tell them, I'm going to research and I'll come back. Yeah. Your kids will honor that more than anything and will know that mom and dad or mom or dad, whatever the household makeup is like, they'll know that, hey, they're going to come back and give me an answer. Yeah. And they're not just going to give me what I want to hear, but they're going to give me what they've researched and what they understood and what they believe about it. Sure. But allow me to come to my conclusion as well about what that looks like. And so that's part of that conversation of like, hey, if I'm going to open up, we've got to know that part and that piece of what that looks like and make that an open conversation.
So it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Completely.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's actually better
Than trying to figure it out.
Than trying to figure it out, or even come up with some half-baked answer. Well, I think it's no.
It's a stork that flies into the window.
And then you go to the plumbing section of the store, and then all these people come together, and they're like, "Hello,"
and then magically a baby pops out.
Yeah.
Surprise,
exactly. There's many resources out there to do that.
I love this. I love that we're going down this path and having these conversations, because I know, I mean, my dad had the talk, and it was a good conversation, but it was so awkward that I think if they were able to have this podcast or this resource and go, okay, I'm going to make it my own, but I'm going to walk alongside my kid in this. And here's the thing parents don't realize, and I'm sure you've come up against this a lot of times, is my kid is doing this and this and this and this. How old's your kid? Oh, they're 16. Like, this is the first time you're having this conversation?
Yeah.
By the time, and I always tell parents, you do the hard work between ages 0 and like 11, maybe 12. And if you don't, then by the time they hit 12 or 13, really they're becoming their own individual person. Right. And if you've not done the hard work before that, good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not impossible, but
it's not.
It's harder.
Yeah. And it takes a lot more work.
Yes.
I mean, it's just like working out. I'm going to think, I'm going to work out in a year, this year. So no, start now.
Go for a walk around the block.
Just start small and incremental.
Right.
And with your kids, and even if they're older and you haven't had that conversation, that incrementalness is going to help. And I think one of the greatest things for parents and dialogue that we have missed in our culture is bringing things back to a dinner table. The conversation and what we see around the table is probably one of the greatest things that we've ever been equipped with as people to have conversations.
Sure.
Because people love to eat. We want to go and eat,
and
we want to talk, and we want to laugh. But that place creates such a disarming place to have conversations where we can turn off devices, where we can look at one another and have hard, difficult, awkward, weird, fun conversations that grow us as a family and grow individuals. And so it doesn't matter if that's a single parent household, a grandparent household, whatever that may be, a two-parent household, whatever that may look like, what it will be like is something that we're going to encourage at that table.
Now, this is probably opening a door into maybe a future podcast, but as we wrap up this one, is this a conversation that is cross-cultural? Because I think, we talk about, politically correct types of things and those kinds of things, but when we talk about, our listeners might not be X culture, right? They might be not Caucasian, or they might be Hispanic or African American. Does this, as we talk further in future podcasts, is this a cross-cultural conversation?
Oh, most definitely. I think this is one of the best cross-cultural conversations because it does touch every aspect of our lives in relationships. I tell students all the time, I could take science, math, everything else away from you, but the thing that you will always have is relationships. It doesn't matter what country you go to across this world, the thing that we always have is relationships, and some of those relationships are intimate relationships which have the context of sexual activity in them. So cross-culturally, for sure.
Cool.
Well, David, thank you for joining us. I hope our listeners have felt just a little bit uncomfortable, but very encouraged to have these conversations. And I hope that two things that I just wanted to leave our listeners with is, one, it's not too late to have these conversations with your kids. It's not too late to start these conversations. And two, we can start having these conversations that aren't about sex.
Yes.
We can build into the sex conversation that continues through other means. So if you need resources on what conversations to get going on today and actually starting that, go back and listen to some of our older podcasts just about race and racism. You can go to Growth Mindset. That's a really safe conversation to start off with, but have some more meaningful conversations this week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/Candid Conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.